Welcome to Pody Says Malicious Compliance, where people conform to the letter, but not the spirit of the request. Want me to come into university class and present orally despite being ill? Okay. For context, this was pre-2020, back in my early university years, aka 2018-2019. It started one Wednesday morning when I woke up feeling like complete and utter crap. This was a problem, as today I was scheduled to do my oral presentation along with other students in one of my classes. But I figured no way would I be wanted to come in sick. And by sick, when I looked in that mirror, I was so pale I looked dead. My nose looked like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, my eyes were so sunken in, they were in the back of my head, and I was sweating like hell from a high fever. Oh, and my throat felt like it was made of sandpaper. Yeah, no way I was going into the lecture hall looking like this. So, I went through the normal procedures, submitting a temporary absence form, which meant for the absence to be valid, I needed to go to a walk-in clinic, joy, and call any professors or teacher assistants to inform them of my absence. We have a lot of interactive stuff in lectures. It's also common courtesy. Along with an email for a paper trail. My afternoon physics professor understood. My evening teacher assistant for earth sciences was cool with it. My morning chemistry professor?
Either you stop lying and come in, or it's an automatic 0.
I'm sorry? I've never missed one of your classes, even with a minor cold, but this? Okay, fine then. So I get up, and my mom drives me in, as I didn't get a license yet. Long story, and she wasn't working that day. She's self-employed. She's worried about me, but I reassured her that I will only be about 20 minutes max. I get to campus and walk in, heading to my lecture hall, and of course, looking like utter crap, stumbling because I'm also running a really high fever. I get a lot of weird looks, and some students even stopped me to ask if I was okay. I recall responding with something like, "I won't be if I'm late for class." When I do get to my lecture hall, I enter 2 minutes late. Professor sees me and goes,
OP, about time. Get down here and start your presentation, or it's a fail.
"Alrighty." I went up, plugged in my laptop to the projector, and released an almighty round of wet coughing. Now, my lecture mates are whispering to each other, and the professor looks at me startled. But all I remember doing is looking right at the professor, smiling and saying very hoarsely, "Sorry, I'll get started." She quickly tried to send me on my way, but I say into the microphone, my voice sounding like a sick bear's, No, you said if I don't present it's a 0. I can't fail 20% of my grade." So, off I go, presenting with a hoarse voice, long, hacking wet coughs, and with occasional almost vomiting. When I finished, I then turned to the professor and asked again into the mic, "Do you need me to stick around for the other presentations or can I go?" I was on my way to the doctor's within 5 minutes, and wouldn't you know, I had a serious case of the flu, something that the university did not want you to bring to campus because it could spread like wildfire. Needless to say, when I filed my full absence form with my doctor's note, I mentioned about how my chemistry professor insisted upon me coming to class. I also included a screenshot of the email she sent me while I was being driven in, which stated the same thing she told me over the phone. When I was finally able to return to campus a week later, I was surprised to enter class to a substitute professor. I later looked at my email and saw a class notification that our original professor was placed on leave. She was let go by the end of the term. Chode3030 says, "I'm a professor and I don't understand this. It's college and they are adults. I always excuse absences. They pay to take my class. I don't care if they miss it." Keegan Tier chimes in, "Seriously, while I have a disproportionately large amount of family deaths each semester, I don't actually care if they are lying or not, beyond feeling bad if they are actually telling the truth. They're adults. If they don't want to come to class or need extra time, even if it is because they are just hungover or are unmotivated, I will give it to them. It's not a big deal." Valkyrie1 wraps up the comments. Likely this was not her first time doing this type of thing to a student. This is why reporting and always giving a paper trail of bad professors is important. It may not happen after your report, but one never knows what their file looks like. Won't pay for breakfast? Well, okay. Then spend $8K on a coffee machine in the name of equality. I enjoy reading your stories. And recently, I got one of my own, which I think you'll enjoy as well. Let me preface by saying this is not in the US, but a smaller country in Europe, so a company our size is pretty big. Well, on to the story. I work for said pretty big engineering company with around 2,500 employees spread around the world. The main part of us, I guess around 2,000, works in our home country, with the main bulk stationed in 4 big offices. Besides the big offices, there's also some smaller ones scattered around the country. I work in one of those. In total, we're 18 people employed at our office. This is obviously not enough people to warrant a reception desk, canteen, IT department, and so on. That means we get on by ourselves for the most part, unless it's a bigger problem we can't solve, in which case we have to call one of the main offices for help. It's a bit slower sometimes, but it's okay, and we don't make a fuss. This also means that there are some differences in how stuff is done in the different places. For example, in our office, the office tasks, ordering paper, organizing the storage area, arranging office to get-togethers, and stuff like that, is just something we all do to make things run. None of us mind, as it's just small stuff that doesn't take a lot of time. In the bigger offices, there's people employed to handle all that stuff. Well, one of our company perks is that every Friday we get 30 minutes paid breakfast in the office. In the bigger offices, there's a canteen where they arrange the breakfast, so the employees just have to waltz down, eat, and go back to work. In our office, we take turns going to the nearest bakery and buying breakfast, then go to a grocery store and get stuff to put on the bread, all on our own time before coming in. We'll get the breakfast reimbursed, but not the time. Again, we didn't mind the arrangement, and neither did the facility manager stationed in the main offices. What they suddenly did have a problem with is that we have a habit of buying some morning cakes, cinnamon buns, or whatever we felt like that day. Might sound weird, but it's a tradition where I'm from, and it's delicious, to go with the breakfast. One day, my boss got a mail from them with a list of what the breakfast could contain, and nothing else, and also a budget for each person, because it had to be equal for all offices. That meant we couldn't get our cakes anymore, and neither cold cuts or meat for our bread. Both because it wasn't on the list, and because we often went a little over budget. The office was in uproar, I tell you. Don't mess with an engineer's breakfast. So we comply, but only buy the stuff we're allowed to. But we hatch out a plan. If they want it all to be equal, all will have to be equal, which means 1. All of us start putting 30 minutes each Friday in the company as we are entitled to. Before, we often just put a smaller amount of time down, or we just didn't, and the time disappeared to other tasks, which to the company could bill to clients. 18 times 30 minutes equals 9 hours each week of lost time. Already a lot more what the breakfast cost extra. 2. We ask for somewhere to put the time we spend collecting breakfast and cleaning afterwards, as the other offices didn't have to do it themselves, and it had to be equal. 3. We make a list of other stuff we don't have that the other offices do. We named every small thing we could come up with, including but not limited to IT department, receptionist, kitchen worker to help collect and make the breakfast, facility worker to keep storage stocked up, fancy coffee machine. What we had was an old school regular coffee maker. Other offices had fancy automatic ones with different blends and stuff. I think around 15 to 20 bullet points of varying pettiness. My boss sends the list to main office and tells them we need this for all things to be equal, as you wanted. Well, we now have a fancy coffee machine costing around $8,000 to get installed because a new water line had to be drawn to where it's placed, and a much bigger maintenance cost because of different blends, cleaning, and so on. Meanwhile, we're all waiting for our IT department to get set up, but I'm guessing we'll get our cakes back before that happens. Get your crap off of my property. In advance, this is not my personal story, but rather that of my friend and his neighbor, retold with his kind permission. I will write this in first person as my friend to avoid confusion. I am also not very technically minded when it comes to electrics, so please bear with me and I shall explain as best as my layman's knowledge allows. Begins. So I live not far from Millamilla in North Queensland, up in the mountains and rainforest. On my property, I am blessed with a strong mountain stream that never goes dry and was perfect for a small hydroelectric setup to produce power for my house. Now, to place it on my property, I would only get a small head of water, meaning the hydro system would not be running at full capacity and produce a lot less power than it was actually capable of. To ensure I was never left dry, I instead installed 2 hydro systems, which essentially meant I could now run everything as much as I liked. To burn off excess power I produced, I mounted a row of heating elements from old hot water systems on the roof of my shed. I could not feed the excess back into the grid, as apparently it is illegal to do this from hydro for some reason, but is apparently perfectly alright for solar panels? A pretty nice setup once complete, and apart from a very small amount of maintenance, I never paid a cent for power ever again. I was on very good terms with my downhill neighbor, and eventually we struck a deal to place the generators on my neighbor's property, where there would be a higher head for my weir, and the turbines would run at full power, easily providing enough electricity for both houses. So we poured a new cement slab for the generators, and ran a new feed pipe from my weir to the new generator site. Wired everything in, and hey presto, free power all around. Everything was good for nearly a decade, until my neighbor finally sold the place and moved south to be with his kids. At first, the new neighbor seemed okay. He had been told about the power sharing arrangement, but apparently had not grasped the bit about the generators being on his property. They were down by the creek, and in the forest, so it may not have been immediately obvious where they were located. Unfortunately, when he did discover them, he appeared to take it as personal affront and came storming to my door one night. "Why are there 2 bloody great machines on my place with a pipe coming from your place?" Do you mean my hydro turbines? "Is that what they are? Why are they on my property? I don't want them there. You need to get rid of them, or I will." Wait a minute. Those turbines are where our power comes from. We can't just rip them out. "That is not my problem. I don't want your crap on my land. You have 1 week to move them or else." The discussion went on some more as I tried to get him to understand why they were there and what they did, as well as the original deal to share power because of where they were. He was either too stupid or too rude to care, so I finally agreed to move them the next day. So, the next morning, I shut off the drive pipe, disconnected the turbines, and loaded it all into my ute. I then went to the original site on my property and reconnected the whole mess. Of course, I had to use the original wiring setup to connect them, which only supplied my house. In any case, there was now only enough power for one place anyway, due to the lower head supplying less pressure. All good, and my place had power again by the evening. My neighbor came home after work to a dark house and defrosting freezers, and went mental. "Where the hell is my power? I'm supposed to get free power in my place. You can't do this." As I repeatedly explained yesterday, the deal was you get your power in return for me being able to site the generators on your property. Now that you forced me to move them, you get nothing. In any case, they now can only supply enough power for one house because of their location, so I guess you're going to have to sort out something for yourself. Neighbor stormed off to buy a petrol generator. In the coming week, he had an electrician in to do a quote to supply main power to his house. Wasn't happy with that, as the house had been off-grid for a decade and would need extensive modification to get back on grid. They would need to put a new pole in on his property at his expense, as well as a new fuse box, around $15,000. He then got a quote for his own hydroelectric turbine, but discovered he did not have sufficient head on his property. The salesman suggested he talk to his uphill neighbor, me, to see if he could run a pickup line from that property. Guess who came to my door, cap in hand and very apologetic, to ask if I would mind putting the generators back on his place so he could have power. When I told him there was no way in hell I was going to do that, he asked if he could have permission to run a drive pipe from my weir instead. Gee, I don't know if I want your crap on my land. I eventually let him do it all, though I did make him sweat a bit first. However, there was a condition attached. If he ever made trouble with me again, that drive pipe was going to come out immediately. Haven't had so much as a peep from him since. Opinionated Aussie gal thinks, "Sounds like our downstream neighbor who came complaining that we were diverting a tiny amount of a spring and threatened us with getting the officials in to examine if we were diverting natural water away from its course. He wanted to divert it to his orchard. Didn't like the response of, 'Sure, but we will direct them to your property next.'" Average Joe 0202 says, "I would have still told him to kiss off. Hope they're charging him rent for the pipe." Big Keef 69 thinks, "Yeah, you can place your crap on my property. But now, in these amended times, I have no choice but to charge an equipment storage fee every month of $300. I sure hope you understand." Me in this situation, probably.